Bless you, friend.
Hey, good afternoon, guys. Good afternoon. It's been a great day, hasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's been a great day. I know you're tired and it's been a long day. Do one thing for me. Stand up. Just kind of stand up and throw your hands in the air like this. Just kind of go like this and then turn this way. Put your hands on the shoulders. Turn this way, guys. Put your hands on the shoulders of the guy in front of you and just rub him down. Just give him just work him over some. Tell him I'll give you 1 hour to stop all that. Work him over. Then turn back this way with your hands in the air like you just don't care, and then turn this way. Put your hands on the guy in front of you and work him over. Yeah, work him over. All right, sit down. Yeah, it felt good, right? It's been a great day. I've enjoyed being with you guys today. You know, a couple of years ago, I did a class that I designed in a book that I later wrote called Living the Exceptional Life, Experiencing True Wealth from the Inside Out. And I asked the participants, what motivated them to take the class? And here are some of the responses. One said, well, I took the class because I feel like my life is so out of control, I'm out of balance. Another person said, I feel like my life, I'm going 100 miles per hour, and I'm exhausted. And then the one that really grabbed my attention was when one shared that, you know what, I feel like I am not really living. I feel like I'm existing and not really living. When I heard that really resonated with me. Because I thought about that idea of living and not really living, but existing. And I know of my own struggle to unplug and to really seek rest. And what I've been seeing lately, guys, I'm seeing everywhere I've been going lately. I just got back from Houston Monday morning, and everywhere I seem to go, I'm hearing about the exhaustion, the weariness amongst guys. Men who are going from task to task, and they're tired, they're stressed, they're weary, they're battling with anxiety. One of the leaders in the ministry that I oversee, checked himself into a hotel room this past weekend and just said he slept, listened to God, turned off the TV, and just rested physically, but also emotionally. And so one of the things in the time that I have here this afternoon, there's one thought that I want to leave with you. One thought I want to leave with you, and it goes like this. Unplugging to rest makes life best. Unplugging to rest makes life best. Now, the question is, what do I mean by unplugging to rest? Because I realize some guys would think, well, I know what I'm doing, Johnny. I got that down. I understand what it means to unplug to rest. I know what I'm doing. Sort of like Rick Sutcliffe, the former pitcher for the Chicago Cubs. He was pitching against the Cincinnati Reds, and whenever a home run was served up, the fans would go wild and fireworks would go off. First inning of the game, first batter of the game. Sutcliffe throws a curveball, crack, home run. Fans erupt, fireworks go off. Second batter comes up. Sutcliffe throws a fastball, crack, home run. Fans go wild, fireworks go off. Well, the manager of the Cubs is now walking out of the dugout, walking to the mound, and Sutcliffe, being a pitcher's pitcher, is waving him off. Tells the manager, I got this. I know what I'm doing. The manager says, I know you know what you're doing. I want to give the fireworks guy more time to reload. Well, guys, this talk right here, guys, may be a time to reload or to load up for the first time of what this means to unplug and to rest. Because when I talk about unplugging and resting, I'm not talking about a passive rest. I'm not talking about 8 hours of sleep, physical rest. I'm not talking about not watching television and becoming a couch potato. I'm not talking about that kind of rest, a passive rest. I'm talking more about an active rest, a rest where we are spending time reflecting, evaluating our lives, spending time, guys, attending to our souls, spending time finding that place where my heart engages God, where my heart comes alive to God. That's an active rest. One of my habits is to go to the woods. I like going to the woods in the morning. I'm a morning guy. I love going to the woods in the morning. I'm out there with Bambi and Rudolph, with the deer. But it's a time for me to unearth everything that's going on inside of me, to reflect and to listen to what the Spirit is doing in me. How critical it is, guys, to attend to our souls. I love what a man named Theodore Roszak says. He says this: we can now recognize the fate of the soul. We can now recognize the fate of the soul that if the spirit within us withers, so too will all the world we build around us. Do you hear what he's saying? He is saying what we are on the inside affects everything we tend to become or we seek to become on the outside. That it's critical to attend to our souls. Unplugging to rest makes life best. This is the emphasis of the Scriptures. Guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flows the issues of life. The issues of life have to do with our relationships, how we manage money, how we handle time, how we handle our emotions, our relationship with God. Unplugging to rest makes life best. And see what happens when we don't unplug. Our lives look like this picture of the iceberg. You know, Bob Record talked about that this morning, that on the surface, for many of us, we appear fine and things seem to be okay. You know, an iceberg is 30% above the water and 70% below the water. And below the waterline that I see in a lot of guys, I see guys who are stressed. I see guys who are weary. I see guys who are battling with anxiety. I see guys who are burnt out. And a lot of times you'll hear leaders in churches who will encourage this. They'll say things. I call this a churchaholic or a pastoraholic, when we become driven with ministry, driven with service, because I'm doing a work for God. You know how we say God's name funny? Yes, we're doing a work for God. And so we become driven with ministry. And we'll say things like, I'd rather burn out than rust out. Now, whether you burn out or rust out, you're out. And whoever said those were the only two options? God is saying, I want you to burn on and not burn out. And I've seen so many of us as men become so exhausted and addicted to ministry, and the real deal of telling whether or not I'm in sync with God and versus I'm exhausted is there joy and peace in my service? Because you see that in the life of two women, Mary and Martha. Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet just listening to his words. Martha goes in the kitchen and gets busy doing a work for God, yet she gets an attitude with God. Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to come in here and help me. Jesus says, Martha, Martha, girl, you worry about a lot of things, but Mary has chosen a good and perfect part. What did Mary choose to do? Sit at his feet. Sit at his feet. One guy sang a song, Lionel Harris, some years ago, says, I miss my time with you, those moments together. I want to be with you each day, but you hurt me when you say. This is from God's perspective to us. You're too busy. You're too busy trying to serve me, but how can you serve me if your spirit is empty? There's a longing in my heart, God says in this song. There's a longing in my heart wanting more than just a part of you. It's true. I miss my time with you. Guys, over 500 times in the scriptures, God is emphasizing going below the waterline. Going below the waterline. The Bible uses the word heart and soul interchangeably many times. The heart, the soul. Guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flows the issues of life. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And He will direct your paths. Wherever your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the over and over. Heart, 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 heart. Going below the line. That's where the emphasis of God is. David says this in Psalm 51:6. God desires truth in the innermost parts, below the waterline. What's going on below the waterline in your life? Ask yourself the question, what is really driving me? And I'm finding more and more with guys, what's really driving us is a search for significance, success, and fulfillment. I love the definition that Robert Lewis has given us in men's fraternity about a real man. Okay? I've given this definition to all my boys early on. And my son Johnny's going to come up, and we got the mic, one of the mics here. Johnny's going to come up, and Johnny's going to share the definition that Robert Lewis has given us that has transformed my life when I read his book several years ago about raising a modern-day knight. And Johnny's going to share. I took Johnny to a ceremony about 3 years ago when he turned 13, and in that ceremony, I gave him a sword, and we had several men come around him and surround him, and we put hands on him, and we prayed over him. My son Jordan is 12. He turns 13. He's having a ceremony in December. But Johnny, is this on? Johnny's going to share with you that definition. What's the definition of a real man? It's not on. Are we? Is that one working? Okay.
Check.
We got that one? Okay. We're going around in circles. Okay, there we go, John. Definition of a real man. What happened at that ceremony that we gave you? Definition of a real man is what?
Rejects passivity, accepts responsibility, leads courageously, and expects God's rewards.
Respects God's reward. Remember when you got this? Yeah, we gave you this and gave you the sword and at that ceremony. And that's the thing that we talk a lot about, that you are called as a young man to reject passivity, but to embrace responsibility. And one of the things that you're getting to do in a couple of weeks is to go off to where?
Belize.
Yeah, Johnny's going to, pray for Johnny. Johnny's going to be doing his first missions trip in Belize in 2 weeks, spending 2 weeks over there involved in sports and leading a vacation Bible school. So thanks, big guy. But the part that I want to camp out here, that I want us to hear in that definition, is that every man is responsible. God asked the question, where are you? Where are you? That's the question that he asked Adam. Where are you? Will you take responsibility for your life? Every one of us as guys, we're responsible for what's going on below the waterline. Beneath the surface, we are responsible for what's going on below the waterline. We are responsible. And I love what Henry David Thoreau says. He says, the mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. On the surface, they look pretty good. But below the surface, there's a whole lot of turbulence and churning going on. Some signs, guys, that you need to unplug. There's several of them, but these are signs that speak to the fact that we are out of sync, we are out of alignment with God and not going and doing the work of the heart and going below the waterline. From practical signs, one of the first signs is the idea of when rushing becomes the norm of your life. When rushing becomes the norm. We live in a culture of speed and hurry. That's the culture in which we live, of speed and hurry. We make phone calls through Sprint, right? We ship packages through FedEx. We eat fast food, and then we diet on Slim Fast. That's our culture. When rushing becomes the norm, speed, rushing becomes the norm. When's the last time when you've eaten a meal and you've taken your time and eaten slowly and really tasted what the food was like versus imbibing the meal, just sucking it up like a vacuum cleaner? When rushing becomes the norm. But a second sign is when anger begins to dominate. Put the D in front of anger, what does it spell? Danger. Many of us are like this soda can. We've got so much stuff shaken up on the inside that we're doing our best to keep the lid on it, that if I were to pop this can open, the stuff is going to fly all over the place. Where are you as it relates to the anger? Because, that's the number one emotion that guys will identify. Underneath that is fear, but guys don't give themselves permission to really be honest about fear, but we will acknowledge anger. Anger. And when we don't deal with what's going on emotionally in our lives, we tend to act it out in very unhealthy ways, below the waterline, when anger becomes the norm. A third thing is when you stop laughing. That's a sign there's no joy. You stop laughing. Do you realize studies show that the average 40-year-old laughs only about 4 times a day? And the average 4-year-old laughs over 400 times a day. Yeah, over 4. Kids are pros at play and laughter. This is why Jesus says, unless you become like a child. You don't see kids on Prozac and Zoloft, antidepressant medication. But our country leads the world in terms of pharmaceutical sales. You know, I take my boys, from time to time, we'll go to breakfast before we go to school. And one particular morning, we were at breakfast, and my son Jordan, my 12-year-old, decided to order dinner for breakfast. He ordered burgers and fries. And he's a funny eater. He's a segregationist when he eats. He does not like blending his food, okay? So he eats the fries first, okay? He doesn't do anything else, just all fries first. And then he gets to the hamburger, holds the hamburger in his hands, and he says this: "Goodbye, my little friend." He speaks to his food. Yeah. And he just did a disappearing act. The burger was gone. But kids know how to play, and kids know how to laugh. A sign that you need to unplug is when you stop laughing. There's no joy. The joy is gone. The joy is gone. And a fourth sign that you need to unplug, when restlessness rules you. When restlessness rules you. See, what happens, we become like Solomon in Ecclesiastes 2. When Solomon says, you know what, vanity, vanities, I'm chasing after the wind. And he says, I'm trying to find life, I'm trying to find meaning, and I'm exhausted. I can't get any satisfaction, is what he's saying. He says, I've given myself to power, to position, to prestige, to possessions, and I'm not finding anything that's satisfying my soul. I'm wanting to be fulfilled. And see, I see us, and I see in my own life many times, I'm chasing after the wind, but it's not a W-I-N-D win, but a W-H-E-N win. I'll be happy when. What's your win? W-H-E-N. I'll be happy when the kids grow up and leave. I'll be happy when I get married. I'll be happy when I get out of this marriage. I'll be happy when I get this new degree. I'll be happy when I save up this amount of money. And you know what happens. There's always another win. There's always another win. And like Solomon, he gets to chapter 12 and he says, now I get it. Now I get it. The conclusion of the matter that if I need to fear God and keep his commandments. He says, now I get it. Now I get it. What does God have to say about this? In Ecclesiastes 10:10, Solomon writes these words: if the axe is dull and one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength. But wisdom brings success. Just in case you guys decided to sleep on me, I thought I'd bring this out. This is my afternoon awakener, you know. What is Solomon saying? He is saying your soul is like this axe. Recognize when the blade is dull. See, what happens is if I'm going to chop down a tree, you know, if I'm not intentional about sharpening the blade, I'm going to have to exert more strength to get the same impact and effect. Solomon's saying is that, but if I'm intentional about keeping the blade sharp, I can chop down the tree in less chops than it would take if I don't keep the blade sharp. Your life, your heart, your spirit is this axe. As guys, what are we doing to be deliberate about keeping the blade sharp? Jesus also weighs in on this in Mark 6:30 and 31. The disciples had been out ministering, and Jesus says, you know what? Come aside and rest a while. What is Jesus saying? He's saying, I want you to be intentional about unplugging after you have poured out. After you have poured out. Guys, this is what our lives look like. You know, we got these different cups that represent our commitments and responsibilities. And here's my life. You know, I pour out big time in my marriage and family. 19 years married. Pour out a whole lot. Pour out there in the marriage and family. Pour out a lot more than that. Pour out a whole lot at work. Pour out a whole lot in the ministry and serving. Pour out in miscellaneous, attending to phone calls, emails. Nothing left. I see a lot of guys who are in this position. Here's the opening, and no one can get to them. God can't. God's looking for a place to land in their life and to fill them up. God calls us as guys, as men, to pour out, but to be intentional about turning the bottle upright so that we can be refreshed and replenished. Pour out, take in. Pour out, take in. This is the model of Genesis. When God creates the heavens and the earth, on the seventh day he rests, he replenishes. An active rest. I see a lot of guys who are like this. And when we're in this position, I see a lot of guys, when we're in this position, we make a lot of bad choices because we're tired and we're weary and the spiritual defense mechanisms are down and we're prone to look for a quick charge, and that's why the sexual becomes so appealing to the man. Because it's a quick charge. It's highly relational, and it can make a man feel alive temporarily. And he keeps going back to that quick charge. This is why G.K. Chesterton says what he says, that a man who finds himself at the door of the brothel, at the door of the prostitute's house, is really searching for God. What he means by that, he's really looking for an aliveness of soul. And he thinks he's going to get it, and he gets it through a sexual encounter, but it's short-lived. What are we doing as guys to turn the bottle upright? To replenish. To refresh. Unplugging to rest makes life best. Here's some great next steps, guys, I want you to consider. I love what Jesus says in Matthew 11:28. He says this, "Come to me, all ye who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you stress." Come to me, all ye who are weary and heavy burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Understand what he's talking about. The yoke was something that people who had animals, mules, horses, would have the carpenter tell them make a yoke to go around that horse's neck. The yoke represented work and service. Jesus is saying this, come to me. This is highly relational. Abide in me. That you find your rest, as David says in Psalm 62:1, find your rest. My soul finds its rest in God alone. Jesus is saying, yes, you are called to work and you are called to service, but guess what? I have a yoke with your name on it. Too many times, if we're honest, we're putting on yokes that God never called us to put on. And that's what's driving the weariness and the exhaustion. We're doing good things, but we're not doing God things. Is it possible you're wearing a yoke that Jesus never made for you? That's what Martha did. Martha's in the kitchen in a yoke. God never tells her that. Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you worry about so many things. I didn't tell you to go in there and do that. But guess what? If we're actively seeking rest and seeking to do and sit at his feet, you won't miss the assignment that God has for you. Sitting at his feet will always lead to service, but service does not always lead to sitting at his feet. Sitting at his feet will always lead to service, but service won't always lead to sitting at his feet. Unplugging to rest makes life best. So what are some practical next steps? I challenge you tomorrow or this week. Take one day this week and for an hour, turn off and unplug from technology. Turn off the cell phone, get away from the computer. There's too much noise going on in your world, in your life. And listen to what the Spirit is doing and saying to your soul. Okay? Tomorrow. You're saying, Johnny, the game's on tomorrow, man. Can we start this on Monday? You decide this week what's the one day you're going to spend time for an hour unplugging from technology and finding the place where your heart comes alive and you can listen. A second thing to consider. Find a place. Go to the woods. Find a lake and take a walk around there. Spend 30 minutes reflecting. Ask yourself the question, are you in the lane that God has called you to? Are you wearing the yoke that God has given you, or have you put a yoke on yourself? Drivenness, success, significance, fulfillment. Apart from Christ, God wants you to be fulfilled, but the fulfillment happens through an abiding relationship with Jesus Christ. But so many of us as guys, we will seek fulfillment apart from Christ, and as Solomon says, it leads to futility. It leads to futility, and we're exhausted. Find a place, find the woods, find a lake, a quiet place where you listen and can hear for 30 minutes reflecting on your life. Ask your soul the question, where am I with you, Jesus? Search me, O God, David says, and see if there's any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the way of life. And consider taking 5 or 10 minutes a day, reading a psalm a day or a proverb a day. Just start right there. You know, playing sports growing up, my sons and I were all in golf. We were involved in golf. My boys were in a golf program, First Tee. And the instructors are constantly telling the boys, Johnny, JP, the ball is dead. Don't try to kill it. It's dead already, all right? Just make contact. Just let the club do the work. All we're saying here is make spiritual contact. 5 or 10 minutes a day. Read a psalm a day, a proverb a day. And some of you consider keeping a journal of your life. For over 20 some odd years, I journal my life. I write a letter to God, or I imagine if God wrote me the letter, what would God say? What would God say? And keeping a journal. The Psalms are really David's journal. The Psalms, David says, you want to read my journal? Here's the book of the Psalms. Book of Psalms. Now, guys, as I close, I want you to imagine what would happen if you and I began to really be deliberate about this. Unplugging to rest makes life best. What could begin to happen? I have found when I am unplugging to rest, I tend to be less scattered. I'm not all over the place, and I'm really all there with energy for my wife and for my sons. I'm fully present. I'm really able to engage when we unplug to rest. I find, guys, that when we do this, we can walk in our spiritual lives and be in sync and have a sense of confidence in our relationship with God and with the Holy Spirit when we choose to unplug to rest. I find that we're less inclined toward the dark side in terms of sexual behavior. We're less inclined because my soul is alive and I'm finding my rest in Christ. And I find that work, this is interesting, I do consulting work, and I'm in a doctorate program in leadership, and so looking at some of the research, over and over, they show that Americans take less and less vacations than any other country in the world. Over in Europe, McDonald's workers get 5 weeks of vacation. 5 weeks. They're showing over and over when employees go off and get rest and replenish. They say that Warren Bennett, one of the leadership gurus, he says that, you know what? They have fresher insights and creativity that they pay consultants for. When's the last time you had a fresh insight? Yeah, and creativity. The creativity comes from a relationship with the Creator. And so what happens is there's an increased productivity at work because of what's happening from rest and replenishing, and you're able to listen from work. You know, my grandfather, with the Lord now, but I'll never forget when I was 16 years old, and I went into the kitchen where he was doing dishes. His back was facing me. And I called him Pop. I said, Pop, now understand, I'm 16 years old. I'm new to Christ, but I'm 16-year-old. You know, I'm hormonal, okay? So I go to my grandfather and I said, Pop, how many girls can I date at one time? Serious, sincere question. How many girls can I date at one time? My grandfather was a man of much wisdom, only a 3rd grade education. He turns around and he looks at me and he says, son, how many hearts do you have? That's all he said. That's all I asked. And I reflect on that many times. And I think about that answer, how many hearts do you have? That I have one heart. I can only give my heart, my life to one person. And for you and me as men, it starts with giving my heart on a regular basis, giving my heart and living below the waterline in a solid, committed relationship with Christ. David says it, my soul finds its rest in God alone. God, thank you for these men. Thank you for our time together this day. We've heard a lot of things. We're tired. The flesh is weary, but the spirit is strong. And we ask, God, that you would help us to not be merely hearers of what we've heard today, but doers. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you, man.